everybody, and welcome to the Healthtech Pigeon podcast, bringing you the top health tech news stories and analysis every week. I'm Belle Taylor, and today I'm joined by two brilliant guests to discuss this week's news in health tech. From SomX, we're joined by our very own Andrew Hare, and our guest today is Dr. Fahmid Chowdhury, consultant radiologist at Leeds Teaching Hospitals. It has been an incredibly busy week here in Pigeon HQ, as we're terming it, so I'm looking forward to diving into this week's news. So shall we get stuck in with story one? AI chest X-rays are speeding up diagnosis at Leeds Teaching Hospitals. This week, we're looking at a major development in diagnostic imaging out of the NHS. Leeds Teaching Hospitals is piloting an AI-powered chest X-ray tool designed to help clinicians detect serious conditions faster and more accurately. The tool's already being used to analyse over 135,000 chest X-rays each year and can flag up to 85 different findings, from lung cancer and infections to mispositioned tubes. It's designed to act as a second pair of eyes for radiologists and is speeding up diagnosis from hours or days to just minutes in some cases. Fahmid, you're our man on the ground at Leeds Teaching Hospital. So can I start by asking you to explain what exactly this technology is and what it means for you and your clinical team at Leeds?
Thank you, and thank you for having me on your podcast. As you've quite rightly said, we're hoping that this innovative development, where we're trying to harness the power of artificial intelligence to help frontline medics to do their job, will benefit thousands of patients at the Leeds Teaching Hospitals. This AI software is actually being used across 6 acute NHS trusts in the West Yorkshire region, of which Leeds Teaching Hospitals is the largest. And as you've highlighted right at the outset, we do about 135,000 chest X-rays as a basic diagnostic test every year at our hospitals. And we can't always report these X-rays immediately. There's often a delay. And when there's a delay in reporting, we either are delaying a diagnosis, potentially, or we're leaving non-radiology clinicians to interpret those X-rays on their own without any assistance. Because a radiologist, as you know, is a medically trained doctor who's specifically trained in looking at medical imaging. So we have certain expertise when it comes to medical imaging, which our colleagues in other specialties don't necessarily have. And we're one of the real advantages of using AI in this setting is that they are getting an extra sort of artificial intelligence assistance with interpreting that chest X-ray, which they wouldn't normally have. So often diagnoses which can be, of immediate importance, and there's a time critical element to diagnosing those conditions, can be missed if the reporting of the X-ray is delayed. And the artificial intelligence software we've chosen for this clinical evaluation across our region is produced by a company called Annalise, who are based out of Australia. Their product is a market-leading product, which is why we've selected it after a procurement exercise. And as you highlighted, it can, within minutes of the X-ray being performed, pick up anything up to 85 different findings, which it's looking for on the X-ray. And then within a few minutes, we have an artificial intelligence readout, which tells the clinician whether A, the X-ray is normal, which in itself is hugely reassuring for the clinician as well as the patient, or B, whether it's picked up an abnormality and what that abnormality is. So we're hoping that with this second pair of eyes for looking at the chest X-rays, it will not only speed up diagnosis potentially, but also provide a safety net where patients can be protected against misdiagnoses. And ultimately, we're hoping that having access to this will also speed up the reporting of X-rays, because if we can, for example, prioritize the reporting of the abnormal X-rays first, then the X-rays which really need reporting will get reported as a priority, and so that should speed that process up as well. So there's potentially a lot of benefits here. We're in the early days of the project because we've only implemented this solution uh, just under 2 months ago. We'll be evaluating it for at least a year, if not slightly longer. And we have a number of different sort of quality improvement, clinically based projects which will come out of this. Ultimately, as I say, we're trying to answer those big things as to, you know, what does AI really bring as a benefit to the clinical shop floor? Because that's an area where a lot of data is still missing, and that's what we've got to hopefully try and answer with this evaluation project.
Amazing. And I mean, AI, it is such a good use case for AI because, as we know, AI is very good at kind of image analysis in all shapes and forms. And I know medical imaging has been something that it's been trained on and we've seen lots of work on over the last few years, hence why you've got this world leading tool. I'm curious, you're obviously a consultant radiologist yourself. You work with many at Leeds Teaching Hospital. How are radiologists responding to this kind of support? Is it enhancing their confidence, or are you finding that some people are raising concerns about potentially de-skilling medics or even over reliance on these tools now or in the future?
That's a really good question. Um, Overwhelmingly, the response from my colleagues has been very positive
Hmm.
because I think they can see the benefit of sort of the best way to describe it in layman's terms is the benefit of having a co-pilot, because we're not replacing the specialist or the doctor in this process, or even the healthcare worker. What we're doing is giving them extra assistance. Um, and so the response from my radiology colleagues has been very positive because they recognize that, for example, if they're reporting a chest X-ray and they think it's normal, and the AI also agrees with them that it's normal, they're getting that additional reassurance that they're not missing a subtle finding, for example. On the other hand, if they think an X-ray is abnormal and the AI is confirming that abnormality, they've again got that additional confidence that yes, we've got this right. We now know what we need to do as the next management for this patient, and we'll do it promptly. There's a third scenario, of course, where I, as the radiologist, may look at the X-ray and think it's normal, and then the artificial intelligence potentially highlights an abnormality. Now, all that means is that I, as the expert, then have to have a second look at that X-ray and either convince myself that I am correct and there is no abnormality there, because as you probably know, a lot of artificial intelligence tools are set up in such a way that they are very sensitive, but they can't always be completely specific, and that's where you need the human in the loop to control that and to give the expert opinion. And so that may, in that third scenario, I as a radiologist may have to look at the X-ray again, but actually that's not necessarily a bad thing, um, because ultimately we want to get it right for the patient. And most of my colleagues agree that AI is in this setting is potentially going to do a good job, and we're going to evaluate that during the course of this project. Your other point was around de-skilling, and that's also a really important point because that's certainly been raised by our team who are responsible for training our resident doctors. And the way of thinking about that is that that's actually an additional tool to help them with their learning and with their training, rather than taking or detracting anything from that process. It actually complements it. And one of the things that we were emphasizing, certainly in the conversations with our resident doctors, is that they, as the next generation of radiologists who are coming through, are the ones who are actually going to have to become much more comfortable with artificial intelligence. Because, again, as you've quite rightly stated, one of the main use cases for artificial intelligence in healthcare is around the analysis of high volume data sets which come out of medical imaging, where it's a perfect substrate for artificial intelligence, because if you train the AI well, you would hope that over time and through that learning process, the AI can actually become quite accurate in assessing looking for certain abnormalities. And even in our initial kind of experience with this product over just the initial 2 months, uh, we're gaining a lot of confidence that it's actually pretty good.
Amazing. That's really, really encouraging to hear. And you're absolutely right in that, these younger generation coming in, this sort of tool is, yes, it might feel novel to us now, but it's going to be their bread and butter going forward. Just like, you rely on X-rays, it will be AI plus X-rays together. And so that's something which we're going to have to become really, really comfortable with. And I love the idea that you're thinking that it's actually an adjunct to training as well, because like you've just so accurately said, that that potential flag where you and the AI disagrees just is encouraging you to look closer, which is just what another colleague would do, or a professor or a student or something. It's that nudge to look again and to re-examine your initial thoughts, which can only be a good thing, you'd hope, in any sort of training and learning. Um, Obviously, you opened by saying that you're at Leeds, but this is one hospital out of 6 that this is rolled out on across Yorkshire. I'd love to know how you think this could be rolled kind of more broadly across the UK, and what infrastructure and training challenges you've come across by rolling it out in Leeds and across Yorkshire that you can see potentially arising problems in a national rollout.
Yeah, that's also a really excellent question, because one of the big challenges that we have, even though we have a lot of aspirations around, implementing artificial intelligence in the healthcare sector, one of the big challenges that we have in England and Wales and the UK in general is that the NHS IT infrastructure is not always of the highest specification. And even in implementing this project, uh, we've found those challenges, and we've had to overcome them, and we're still trying to overcome certain challenges. Um, so that is an issue that has got to be addressed. It's a very fundamental prerequisite for rolling out artificial intelligence. Your basic IT infrastructure has to be able to support that. Our project is actually one example of several which are going on across the NHS right now. And even with this particular chest X-ray AI product from Annalise, it is actually being rolled out in other hospitals around the country as well. And the NHS has supported that through an AI deployment fund, which is also essentially funding this project in our region. So we will, over a relatively short period of time, um, have quite a bit of experience and also gather quite a lot of data about what's the real benefit of AI in a clinical setting. And if we can, as potential trailblazers in this area, we can demonstrate on behalf of the NHS that there's a real value and patient benefit, because that's ultimately what we're looking for: benefit for our patients, and also secondary point is benefit for our staff, because
Absolutely.
we know for example that um, there's a 8% increase year on year in complex imaging going on across the health service. We know that the workforce is not keeping pace with that. If you look at the latest Royal College of Radiologists survey and census, they've basically highlighted that there's a 19% shortfall in consultant radiologists in the UK at present. And so anything we can do to harness the power of AI to ultimately, at present, certainly it's not going to replace anybody, but if it can help us to do our work and perhaps speed up our work and make it safer and give us more confidence to be able to do that work, perhaps in a less time, you know, then that will help. Every aspect of this will help with the workforce challenges. But across the NHS, I think the fundamental point, which you quite rightly raise, is that the IT infrastructure has to be up to a certain specification, and there have to be some improvements there if we're going to really have national rollout of these products.
It's a funny thing, isn't it? Because we talk about all these great AI technologies and stuff, but people are using 25-year-old computers and operating systems,
Yes.
which were never designed to deal with this because it didn't even exist at that moment in time. But I think you make a really good point around sort of workforce versus data volume as well. What's interesting to me is we hear lots in the news around the shrinking workforce in medical care, about people leaving the medical sector. We hear about lack of pay rises, increased workload, lots of conditions that are forcing people out of medical care, or maybe like reducing the numbers coming in. But we hear less about the fact that the people already in it, their job is expanding so massively every day, because whilst new technologies come in which are brilliant and can change the world and change how we do medicine, the amount of insights and data is just expanding day upon day, and we just don't have the people needed to sift through that. So we need to use technology in some way. So I mean, I applaud you at Leeds for doing this. I think it's a really, really lovely use case, and I'm excited to see the report in a year's time. We'll have to get you back on to discuss. And I'm sure as well, this technology is not just applicable to chest x-rays. I'm sure when you start to show that impact, not only
Yes.
will other NHS trusts look at it and say, we can do that, but you also have other departments say, oh, what about using it for these sorts of medical scans as well? So I'd be really interested to see, well, where do you think the next steps are in terms of applying this technology elsewhere in the hospital system?
Absolutely, absolutely. This is the tip of the iceberg, actually.
Mhm. Incredible. All right. Well, Andrew, did you have any questions for Fahmid on this topic, or shall we move on to story number two?
Yeah, I did. I suppose a practical question really would be, you spoke about the benefits. I guess I'm wondering kind of in practical terms, kind of what are the metrics and evaluations on that? How do you kind of measure success and show you've achieved the results you want to achieve with this project?
Yeah, that's also a really good question, and that's something that we are, even in the formative stage of this project, we were grappling with that, because how do you demonstrate the metrics to show that it's valuable? Um, I think I'd answer that question in sort of from two angles. One is the qualitative aspect. So I think that's relatively straightforward for us to assess if we use the product for a year, and more than a year. In fact, we're planning to do that just by doing simple structured surveys of the workforce, and to gather their experience, or the sort of metrics around their experience of using the product in their day-to-day work. There's a lot of absence of that kind of data. So that in itself, I think, will be very helpful. And we've done that in the past with other AI products, where a team of radiologists have evaluated something, and then we've done a structured survey where 75% have said, well, we don't think this will be that useful, and this is probably, it's got some benefits, but overall we would not invest in this. So that sort of feedback, as long as we do it in a sort of structured way, and we have sufficient number of cohort of individuals feeding into that, and sufficiently powered, I think that'll be very useful. That'll be informative. Now, in terms of the quantitative matrix, quantitative data, that's more complicated, but we are planning on looking at sort of broad stats from our service, such as, for example, how long does it take to report a chest X-ray? How long are the X-rays waiting to be reported? If that can show an improvement during this time, there may be other confounding factors, but generally, I'm sure it will have an impact on that figure. We're also looking at other things like, the amount of time the patient is residing in the emergency department or the acute medicine department, because we know that there's a lot of use of chest X-rays in those departments. And sometimes there is a bit of delay with the patient flow because somebody's waiting for the chest X-ray to be reported, for example. So if they have the AI as a second pair of eyes and a co-pilot for them to make a decision before the report is available, then can that speed up the patient's flow through the department? Can it reduce their dwell time in that acute department? So we're probably going to look at those kind of stats as well. And ultimately, if you're looking at patient safety, we know that in the NHS, in every trust, in every department, in every service, there are a certain number of patients every year who suffer harm because a radiological finding goes unreported and it surfaces afterwards. So I think over time, with this cohort of patients who are put through, whose chest X-rays are put through the AI, we're going to have to look for those kind of metrics. And we're not doing a randomized trial here, but at least we do have a lot of historical data that we can compare with. And if we find, for example, that there isn't an adverse event from a misplaced feeding tube during this 18 months that we've evaluated the tool, then we might draw a natural conclusion from that this has had something to do with that improvement in patient safety. So those are, I think, the kind of things that we're going to have to look at. But it's a really good question, and it's almost the $1 million question.
We'll have to look at the report when it comes out and compare it to this conversation and see what else made it in. Absolutely fascinating. Well, thank you so much for discussing. If you're up for it, I'd love to discuss a next story today, because we've got a really good news story, which I think would be really fun to chat about. The NHS is set to DNA test all newborns in England to predict disease risk. So a major shift is coming to public health in England. Under new NHS plans, every newborn baby will have their entire genome sequenced to assess their risk of developing hundreds of diseases. The goal is to move the health system from one that reacts to illness to one that predicts and prevents it, which I'm sure sounds familiar to anyone who's listened to this podcast before or paid attention to any health tech news. This is part of a broader 10-year government strategy, which includes 650 million in funding for genomic research and aims to create a DNA database of over 500,000 genomes by 2030, which is obviously a big step up from the 100,000 genomes project of yore. The interesting thing about this news, I think, or something which at least makes it feel a bit unusual, is that the sequencing will be done using umbilical cord blood and will focus on early onset and treatable conditions. This extends it beyond the current heel prick test, which is done on newborns, which checks for just 9 diseases. So obviously this has huge potential for earlier diagnosis and personalised care. But experts warn that scaling this program will firstly obviously require major investment in genetics, but also in genetic counselling, clear strategies for data privacy, and how we interpret this data as well, and how when you're potentially in quite a vulnerable state, when you're about to have or you've just had a new baby, how kind of this wealth of information might make you feel, both as a parent and as potentially as a healthcare professional as well. So I'd like to open this up to both of you, really. What are your thoughts on this story? And I guess what do you think the clinical and ethical implications of this are, of sequencing the full genome of every newborn in England? Who'd like to go first? Andrew, why don't you, since Fahmid's had a grilling?
Yeah, no worries. No, I think it's an interesting story. I think it's a very kind of smart preventative use of technology, which fits really well with our beloved Health Secretary, Mr. Streeting's preventative agenda. My slight kind of worry about this, I guess, was, I suppose, some concerns around kind of patient data and privacy. Obviously, collecting information like that, genetic data from newborns, is very sensitive. So I think it'll need to be thought through very carefully how that's stored, accessed, and assessed to avoid, leaking of sensitive data.
Yeah, I mean, it's the crux of this matter, isn't it, really? Like, nowadays, I mean, the data question will never go away, but it's how do we store this and how do we get people confident that it's not going to be used for nefarious means in whatever way? And you'd hope that NHS would mean that that's not the case, but I think we hear news stories like every so often that makes people worry that that doesn't necessarily mean your data is safe as well. So how do you ensure that people are opting into this, knowing exactly what's going to happen to their data and how it's going to be used now and in the future, and potentially giving patients the option to opt out as well? Not everyone will feel comfortable with this, I'd imagine, and they shouldn't feel that they have to. So how do we feel? How do we get this feel of choice and intentionality around screening such as this? It's obviously, from a medical point of view, obviously it's amazing, this huge wealth of data, and you can then potentially follow these humans through their whole life, from screening before they were born right through as they grow into adulthood. It's like an amazing academic exercise in what data can show us. But yeah, it's complex, and I think especially when babies are born and they don't obviously have the ability to say yes themselves, how can we ensure that we are really listening to these privacy concerns? Fahmid, what are your thoughts here? You're obviously a doctor, so you're dealing with sensitive data and sensitive situations all the time.
Yes, I mean, there are real parallels here with the discussion we've been having about artificial intelligence too, because there again, one of the concerns that we have as healthcare professionals and our patients have is how safe is their data, because we're clearly sharing large amounts of data with artificial intelligence companies, and how do we safeguard that? Well, I mean, from a point of view of reassuring your listeners, I would say that there are actually very robust information governance and data protection processes in the NHS. And I think you kind of alluded to that in one of the comments that you made, and you're quite right. They are actually generally quite robust. And we have experience of that through the artificial intelligence projects that we try and implement. We have to jump through a lot of hoops before we can
Mm-hmm.
implement these products. And we generally, as a general principle, we only use the data that we need to answer the clinical question. And we don't share data with anyone who doesn't need to have that data. So that's the very fundamental principle of information governance in the healthcare sector. But another parallel, I would say, to what you were describing is that, one of the untapped potential of artificial intelligence right now is what role could it play in personalizing treatment plans for
Yeah.
patients by using data to predict what the most effective interventions would be for that individual. Instead of looking at populations, we look at individuals. And that's where projects such as this, where we collect genetic information, actually have a lot of parallels with what the future of healthcare is going to be. And of course, as Andrew, you were saying, the preventative agenda for healthcare is a massive one, because we know that, the discussions we were having earlier about, how clinical activity is going up year on year. We're seeing more patients. We're seeing more complex patients,
Mm-hmm.
which is a big change that we're seeing over recent years. And we're doing vast amounts of medical imaging. We're doing lots of operations. We're doing and we're doing lots of interventions because people are ill. um, how can we tackle that right at the grassroots level and prevent things from going wrong in the first place? I think that's a huge challenge for healthcare, and if we don't address that, it's almost like the healthcare sector is unsustainable in its present form.
Mm.
So hopefully, if members of the public, parents, patients understand this, then it's easier to get people to come on board, because we've certainly found that with artificial intelligence. Because one of the things we've done in our hospital is that we actually have a patient engagement group with whom we discuss the artificial intelligence projects that we're thinking of implementing and so on. And what we found, our experience has been that when you explain things and you have an open conversation with patients, they're more than intelligent enough to understand what we're trying to do, and they actually even contribute to that process in a very constructive and positive way. And once you get that alignment between the healthcare worker and the patient, it's actually relatively easy to progress with these things because everyone's on the same page. And I hope that through information and allaying some of the concerns that people have, we'll be able to get parents, because the baby doesn't really have a say in the matter. It's the
Well, yeah.
parents, isn't it? They'll come on board with this and understand that actually there are some real benefits, provided that we allay their concerns about data protection and so on. But the NHS, I think, is in a very powerful position to make really positive use of this sort of data.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, at the end of the day, every person and every parent, all they want is, for the health of those children. And anything we can do to prevent people getting sick in the first place is going to be better than preventing, than helping already sick children. That being said,
Absolutely.
there's going to be, in my little intro, I alluded to sort of genetic counselling. There's going to be a communication barrier that comes up, and there obviously already is that in medicine. It's how do we explain complicated, difficult, sometimes big and complex and difficult to understand things to people who are scared and worried and things like that. Obviously, as a newborn parent, I imagine those fears are compounded. I'm not a parent myself, but I can imagine you're already in that state of real worry over the future of this tiny thing that you've brought into the world. How can we ensure that data like this, and I'm not sure either of you will know the answer, but it's a question to the room anyway. How can we ensure that this sort of information that parents receive it in a way that is understandable and meaningful, especially when the results involve uncertain or non-immediate risks? Let's not lie, this is a future-looking exercise. This is looking at your genomic sequence to understand how you might get ill in the future. So this baby might not be ill yet in this scenario. So it's a really complicated conversation to have. How do we begin to do that? Fahmid, you're nodding away, so I'll let you go first. You might regret the nods.
I was nodding because I agree with the premise of your question very much. So it is complicated, but generally what we find, as I've kind of already alluded to in one of my previous comments, is that if instead of taking a paternalistic attitude to this from the medical kind of community, we involve patients and we involve the public in actually finding a solution to the question. So in other words, how do we communicate this? We involve patients, we involve parents in that. And there are many examples of that in healthcare where we do that already, and that helps us to get our message out. There are lots of patient engagement groups. There are lots of patient advocacy groups who actually do a fantastic job in working with medics to making sure that messages are not just simplified, but they're kind of it's the right message.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as we work on that, I think we can sort of make we can make it a little bit easier to solve this problem. I don't know, Andrew, what you feel.
Yeah, I think now patient communication is critical as part of this. I think it's really important that's delivered by clinicians who are very knowledgeable in their subject and the screening program and kind of communicate that in a clear and concise way. And I think also written information is very important that we have that in plain English that's kind of not too jargon heavy and very accessible, so we can make that as clear and accessible to the the patients and their carers as possible.
And this again brings us round to circular kind of conversation, because I come back to AI, because that's obviously an area I'm very interested in. We've tried doing this using AI, by the way, where we worked with well-known company to use a large language model to see if we can convert radiological reports into a patient-friendly version.
How did that go?
Yeah, it was a very interesting experience, because what our patient participants, our patient representatives felt was, when they saw the finished product from that, they didn't feel it was particularly useful. They said they would have preferred to just have the original radiology report. So but there are lots of things like this which can be trialed and tried out and tested, because It's something that we have to get right, I think, before we roll out a project of this nature.
I mean, Andrew and I are both in the comms game, so we understand that. And, lots of people point towards AI tools as being able to do comms jobs, but quite honestly, the output doesn't sound like a human, nor does it produce something that humans want to engage with, which is the main thing. People like to read things that have interest and intricacies and and that sort of thing. So I think AI does a very good job of summarizing things, put it input as a report, output a bullet pointed list, a summary, follow-up questions, anything like that, but actually turning stuff into engaging prose that can communicate difficult things simply. There's a reason we do our jobs. It's a hard job and it kind of requires a brain. Anyway, Andrew, I know you wrote Pigeon this week, so I'm curious as to what are the elements of this story that you'd like to dig into.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting questions for me here was a practical one. So when you do the research, there's actually quite a shortage of genetically trained counsellors in the NHS. So one of my questions, I guess, would be a practical one. Does the NHS have a sufficient critical mass of expertise to kind of deliver this and communicate this at scale? That's one of the potential limitations, I think, for me in this story. Which I guess, Fahmid, you probably know more about than I do, but that was one of the questions that I had.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, Andrew, I'm not an expert in that part of the workforce in the NHS, but if my experience of every other group of healthcare workers is anything to go by, there will be a lack of human resource there, and we need to have in parallel with developing these innovative ideas, we must make sure that we've got the trained workforce to back that up, to make it a sort of a successful rollout.
And it's also public education, right, as well. I imagine some big public education campaigns are going to be needed with something like this. Like, we've seen this story in the BBC, we've seen it in the Telegraph. So, I mean, that hits two different audiences. But this is a complex thing that's going to roll out over a long period of time. And so it's that kind of ongoing education that you can give people so that they feel empowered with the knowledge of what they're opting into, and also feel excited about it. Like, as medical professionals, as healthcare professionals, we can see how exciting this could be, right? It's this massive repository of really useful medical genomic data. And then we see the potential of the AI you talked about earlier, Fahmid. We think about wearables. You imagine a baby born today, its lifetime, it's going to be tracked at every moment. There will be data of where it's been. There will be data of when it got sick. There will be data of when it felt stressed. There will be such a rich wealth of data about humans in the future that there isn't necessarily now. And I think people are becoming more comfortable with that. And it's a really exciting proposition. But we need we need everyone to feel excited about that and feel really, really informed as well. And you've mentioned many times that this conversation is quite cyclical. And yes, with data comes the need for more technology, and the circle continues. Thank you both so much for your time. Fahmid, thank you so much for joining us. Really enjoyed grilling you about the Leeds Teaching Hospitals story. And we look forward to hearing more about that over the coming weeks and months as well. Well, thank you so much for your time. What I will now encourage our listeners to do is please check out the best news stories of the week in Healthtech Pigeon, which is out this weekend, and Biotech Dodo if you're more interested in biotech. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with any people you think will enjoy today's episode. Thanks again to my guests, and have a wonderful week. Bye.